So you probably consider yourself a pretty honest person.
I think most of us do, yeah.
Right. I mean, if you were listening to this deep dive on your commute right now, or maybe you are folding laundry at home, you look at your life and you check off the big boxes.
You do not rob banks.
No, you do not rob banks. You do not shoplift electronics.
Right.
And if a cashier hands you a $20 bill instead of a 10 for your change, well, you hand it back.
Because you are a good citizen. You feel secure in your moral standing.
Yes, you do. But back in July of 1740, Jonathan Edwards stood in a New England meeting house and mathematically, relentlessly proved that nearly every single person sitting in those wooden pews was an active, unrepentant thief.
Wow. That is quite the accusation.
It is. Welcome to Reform Thinking. Today, the mission of our deep dive is to investigate a sermon Edwards preached on Exodus 20.15.
Thou shalt not steal.
That is the one. We are going to take a high-definition x-ray of your daily transactions, your work habits, your casual conversations, and even your charitable giving.
Edwards is about to expose fractures in our integrity that, honestly, we have spent our entire lives learning how to hide.
Let us set the stage here. What is the theological bedrock Edwards is standing on for this?
Well, to understand the sheer force of what he is doing in this text, we have to look at how we view the law. As Protestant Christians who adhere to the Westminster Confession of Faith, we do not view the Ten Commandments as some archaic list of civic suggestions.
Like they expired in the Bronze Age.
Right. The Confession, which was drafted by brilliant theological minds in the 1640s, makes a very crucial distinction about the laws God gave to Moses at Mount Sinai.
Okay, what is the distinction?
It teaches that the moral law, which is summarized in the Ten Commandments, is perpetual.
Meaning it never expires.
Never. It binds all mankind in all eras across all cultures forever. God's law is a direct reflection of his unchanging character.
So when Edwards is preaching on the Eighth Commandment in the middle of a sweltering Massachusetts summer, he's not just giving his congregation financial advice.
No, not at all. He is unfolding the eternal standard of a holy God regarding true justice and human property.
Let us start right there with how Edwards categorizes those laws for Mount Sinai, because it sets up his entire definition of what theft actually is.
Yeah, he points out that God delivered different types of legislation to the Israelites.
Some laws were ceremonial.
Right, dealing with animal sacrifices and temple rituals, and then some were judicial, organizing the civic government of the nation of Israel.
But those specific laws were temporary.
Yes, they acted like scaffolding for the Jewish nation, and they were taken down once Christ arrived.
But the Ten Commandments are different.
Very different. They are the permanent moral law.
And Edwards notes they are divided into two tables.
Yes. Our duties to God are in the first 4 commandments, and our duties to our fellow man are in the last 6.
And the Eighth Commandment sits right there in the second table.
Designed to protect a neighbor's estate and possessions.
But then he gives a summary definition of the forbidden act that completely reorients the conversation.
What does he say?
He defines theft as an unjust usurping of our neighbor's property without his consent.
That covers an enormous amount of ground.
It really does.
Yeah.
I mean, he is not talking about a burglar with a crowbar. He is talking about any mechanism of usurpation.
The mechanism of how Edwards arrives at that massive definition is fascinating. He is using a specific interpretive method that Jesus Christ himself established.
In the Sermon on the Mount, right?
Yes. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus confronts the religious leaders of his day, the Pharisees, who had this highly convenient microscopic reading of the law.
They like to keep things very literal so they could find loopholes.
Well, precisely. The Pharisees read the commandment, do not murder, and concluded that as long as there was no physical corpse bleeding out in the street, they had kept the law perfectly.
But Jesus shatters that illusion.
He does. He expands the prohibition to reveal that unjust anger, malice, and hatred are the actual root of murder.
So they violate the very heart of the commandment.
Right. And he does the same thing with adultery, linking it to the private intent of lust in the mind.
And Edwards takes that standard and applies it directly to the Eighth Commandment.
Yes. The prohibition against stealing must be understood in its widest possible latitude. It includes all things of the same nature or kind.
So stealing encompasses absolutely any method by which you wrongfully interfere with your neighbor's rightful ownership.
Anything at all.
I want to introduce an analogy here because I think visualizing this changes how we interact with the concept of morality.
Okay, let us hear it.
Our modern instinct is to treat the moral law like a do not cross police tape at a crime scene.
Sure, like a boundary.
Right. Police tape is restrictive, It just tells us where the forbidden zone is, and our natural inclination is to walk right up to the yellow tape.
Put your toes right on the line.
Yeah, see how close we can get without technically crossing into the penalty area.
We all do that.
But what if we think of the moral law not as police tape, but as an architectural blueprint for human flourishing?
Oh, I like that.
A blueprint shows you where every load-bearing rivet, every steel beam, and every electrical wire must be placed so the building does not collapse on the people inside.
Right.
If the law against theft is this broad blueprint covering all human interaction with property, it changes the stakes entirely.
It really does.
If we violate the blueprint in microscopic ways every single day, the structural integrity of our society is compromised.
I will pick up that blueprint analogy and take it a step further.
Go for it.
If you remove a single load-bearing rivet, let us say, the basic trust between an employer and an employee regarding time management, the structural integrity of the entire macroeconomic system begins to sag.
Wow.
And this ties directly into the Reformed doctrine of total depravity.
Which people often misunderstand.
They do. Total depravity does not mean human beings are as evil as they could possibly be at all times.
Right.
It means that the infection of sin has tainted every single faculty of our nature, including our logic and our reasoning.
So our fallen minds naturally seek out the police tape because we want loopholes.
Yes. We want to justify our small daily selfishness. But a strict, expansive definition of the law destroys those loopholes.
The Apostle Paul calls the law a schoolmaster.
Designed to show us our absolute inability to measure up to God's standard.
It reveals our desperate need for the grace of Christ.
Because once you accept that theft includes any unjust usurpation of property, you are forced to look in the mirror and admit you are guilty.
So, since theft is any unjust usurpation, Edwards starts categorizing all the varied ways we accomplish this.
And the very first major category he identifies completely upends our normal categories of crime.
Because it involves stealing by doing absolutely nothing.
The dishonesty of withholding.
Yeah. Edwards argues that we steal by withholding what is rightfully due to our neighbor.
He points specifically to broken promises and unfaithfulness in business agreements.
He observes people breaking agreements simply because the terms become inconvenient over time.
Or because they change their minds after the fact.
He talks about a hired laborer who does not work hard for the day's wages.
Or a manager entrusted with a task who fails to oversee it as diligently as if it were his own private business.
We have to examine the theological physics of a promise to grasp why Edwards calls this theft.
Okay, let us break that down.
When you make a promise to someone, or when you enter into a binding agreement, that verbal or written commitment instantly transfers a property right.
Really? Instantly?
Yes. It invests your neighbor with ownership of your future action or your future resource.
So when Tuesday rolls around and you decide to break that promise because you are tired or because a better offer came along,
You are not simply being unreliable. You are physically taking their property.
you are withholding a possession that belongs to them.
The logic holds firm with daily labor too.
How so?
If an employer purchases your time, your physical effort, and your mental focus for an 8-hour window, those specific resources now belong to the employer.
So if you withhold your diligence, you are pocketing something they already paid for.
Let us translate this into the modern workplace because the applications are staggering.
Oh, absolutely.
We have a whole lexicon now for this behavior. We talk about quiet quitting.
Where an employee decides, without telling management, to do the absolute bare minimum required to avoid termination.
Right. Or consider the massive shift to remote work.
That is a big one.
Think about the person sitting in their home office, keeping their chat status green by jiggling the mouse every 10 minutes.
While spending 2 hours scrolling through a social media feed or binge watching a television show.
Based on the logic Edwards is laying out, is that individual actually violating the 8th commandment?
Yes, I would say so.
I propose that this modern time theft is the exact behavior Edwards was targeting.
If you are listening to this, evaluate your own work ethic today.
Are you managing your employer's or your client's resources and time with the intense diligence you apply to your own personal bank account?
Edwards argues that if you do not manage their affairs as if they were your own, you are a thief.
He is unsparing on this point.
He states that if you are hired to accomplish a piece of work, and you do not use the care, the contrivance, and the diligence that you would employ if the affair was your own, you are withholding what is due.
It is a severe, uncompromising standard.
It completely incinerates the common modern excuses.
Like, my manager does not appreciate me.
Or, this corporation makes $10 million a year, they will not miss my 2 hours of lost productivity.
The eighth commandment does not contain an exemption clause based on your employer's profit margins or your personal job satisfaction.
No, it does not. If you agreed to provide a specific service for a specific wage, failing to provide that service in full is theft.
So from withholding our labor and our focus, the text moves to withholding literal funds.
This brings the conversation to the dishonesty of debt and the reality of misplaced priorities.
Edwards has incredibly sharp words for individuals who neglect to pay the debts they owe.
He lists a few common reasons why people fall into this trap.
Living above their financial means, basic covetousness, or sometimes just sheer carelessness with their bookkeeping.
But he uses a specific hypothetical example that is devastating.
He describes a person who possesses the actual cash to pay a tradesman.
But chooses instead to spend that money buying gay clothing for their children or using it to advance their own estate.
They hold the funds in their hand, but they prioritize their own luxury over their neighbor's rightful property.
And then Edwards tackles the ultimate rationalization.
Withholding payment because the creditor is affluent.
Right. In the debtor's mind, the wealthy person can well bear to lie out of his money.
The psychological autopsy Edwards performs on these choices is brilliant.
The debtor in that example is actively elevating their personal desires or their family's social status above the requirements of basic justice.
They look at the silver in their hand. They know perfectly well it is owed to the tradesman who did the work.
And they make a calculated decision that their child's fashionable appearance is a higher priority than obedience to God's law.
And regarding the wealthy creditor excuse, Edwards completely dismantles it.
He points out to his congregation that the very definition of a debt means the money belongs to the creditor.
In the eyes of God, an unpaid debt is stolen money sitting in your pocket, regardless of the balance in the creditor's bank account.
The personal wealth of the person you owe grants you zero moral right to detain their property.
It is just as unlawful to withhold what is due to a millionaire as it is to openly pick the pocket of a millionaire.
That makes me think immediately about our modern credit card system and how we view delayed payment.
We live in a society fundamentally built on leveraging future earnings for current consumption.
Is carrying a credit card balance to buy luxury items a form of theft against your own future or against the creditor?
Let us say you buy an expensive piece of technology or book a luxury vacation that you do not strictly need.
Fully knowing you cannot pay the statement balance at the end of the month.
You are making a deliberate choice to delay justice.
I would suggest that delaying payment for your own convenience is akin to treating someone else's wallet as a zero-interest loan facility without their actual consent.
You are forcing the creditor, or perhaps the small business owner who is waiting 30, 60, or 90 days on your invoice, to bear the financial burden of your lifestyle choices.
Now, while modern credit agreements obviously have explicit terms, conditions, and interest rates legally baked into them, the underlying moral principle Edwards highlights is totally applicable.
When we delay paying a local tradesman, or we string along a freelance graphic designer for 2 months because keeping the cash in our own account is better for our monthly cash flow,
We are making them suffer for our convenience.
Edwards states that we rather choose to put our creditor to inconvenience by being without what properly belongs to him than to put ourselves to inconvenience by being without what does not belong to us.
That is a massive failure of the biblical command to love our neighbor.
It is prioritizing our own financial comfort over their rightful property.
So we have looked at withholding what belongs to a neighbor through broken promises, shoddy work, and unpaid debts.
Yes. And now Edwards pivots to the second major category of his sermon, actively taking what belongs to a neighbor.
And he begins this section by examining negligence and fraud,
For negligence, he goes straight to the agrarian laws of the Old Testament.
citing Exodus 22.5.
He uses the example of a man letting his beast, his ox or his sheep, wander over and eat a neighbor's field.
Doing nothing to prevent damage to someone else's property is legally and morally classified as an active taking of that property.
And then he moves to fraud. This is the section that becomes highly uncomfortable for anyone involved in commerce or sales.
Oh, yeah. He defines fraud as concealing defects in goods sold, keeping silent about known flaws.
Charging more than an item is worth if the hidden flaws are known.
Or the buyer falsely claiming an item is worthless to manipulate a lower price.
He quotes Proverbs 20.110, where the buyer says, it is not, to drive the price down, but then walks away boasting to his friends about the incredible bargain he just secured.
The focus Edwards places on silence as a primary mechanism of theft is incredibly sharp.
In secular common law, there is a well-known concept, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware.
The burden is on the purchaser to inspect the goods.
But in the jurisdiction of God's moral law, the burden is firmly placed on the seller to be truthful and transparent.
If a seller knows a specific defect exists and the buyer pays full market price believing the item is flawless, the seller has taken money for a value that simply does not exist.
The seller is directly profiting off the buyer's ignorance.
Edwards equates this to taking payment for a ghost, for something the buyer never actually received.
You are pocketing cold, hard cash in exchange for an illusion.
And Edwards ensures the buyer is not let off the hook either.
Right. Downplaying the true value of an item, acting like you are doing the seller a favor by taking it off their hands just to manipulate them into a lower price.
Is the exact same sin operating in reverse. It is using deceit to unjustly usurp the property of your neighbor.
Wait, let me push back on this, or at least try to find the line here, regarding modern salesmanship and marketing.
Okay.
Where's the boundary between highlighting a product's best features, which is just good business, and committing fraud by concealing its limits?
Let us use a detailed hypothetical to look at that.
Imagine you are selling a used car.
Okay, a used car.
You spend the weekend detailing it. You make the paint shine. You vacuum the interior. You highlight the incredibly low mileage in your online advertisement.
Sure.
But you know for a fact that the transmission slips a little bit when the temperature drops below 40 degrees.
Oh, that is a big issue.
But you do not explicitly lie about it. If they asked, you would tell them.
But you just do not mention it.
Right. A young couple comes to take it for a test drive on a warm, sunny July afternoon.
The car runs perfectly.
They notice nothing wrong, and they pay your full asking price. According to the standard Edwards is setting, you are a thief.
You did not break into their house in the dead of night, but you took their money through the strategic, calculated use of silence.
Your omission was a literal act of theft.
Under the framework of the moral law, you have accurately diagnosed the crime.
If you accept a higher price than the car would fetch, if the transmission issue were publicly known, you have stolen the financial difference in value.
Your silence is the crowbar you use to commit the theft.
The reformed understanding of the law demands truth in the inward parts.
It requires us to actively protect our neighbor's estate and well-being as if it were our own.
Ask yourself, would you want to hand over your hard-earned savings for a car with a hidden, expensive transmission problem?
Of course not.
Therefore, the golden rule, the command to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, demands you do not inflict that exact scenario on anyone else.
This escalates rapidly. We go from hidden fraud and calculated silence to overt taking.
Edwards moves into the use of force, systemic oppression, and the manipulation of the legal system.
He defines violent taking not just as open robbery in an alleyway or piracy on the high seas.
He defines it as taking advantage of a neighbor's poverty or absolute necessity to extort them.
He cites Leviticus 25 and Amos 4, issuing severe warnings against oppressing the poor.
A prime example he uses is raising the price of provisions during a time of public scarcity.
We call this price gouging today.
But he also notes that extorting affluent people just because they possess deep pockets or because they need your specific services urgently is equally abhorrent.
And perhaps the most shocking part of this section is his commentary on the legal system itself.
He argues that taking advantage of human laws to gain what moral honesty forbids is a violent dealing with our neighbors.
That specific point about human jurisprudence requires a solid understanding of the Reformed perspective on the hierarchy of law.
In this theological tradition, human laws are always, without exception, subordinate to God's higher moral law.
The state creates legal codes to try and maintain civic order and secure property rights.
But human lawmakers are inherently fallible.
Therefore, the legal code will always contain gaps, unintended loopholes, and complex technicalities.
What Edwards is arguing is that just because a state law allows you to do something or provides a clever loophole for you to acquire someone else's property,
it provides zero excuse for you before the throne of God.
you might win the civil court case based on a brilliant legal technicality. The judge might bang the gavel in your favor.
But God, the judge of the universe, will evaluate you by his own moral law.
Legality does not equal morality.
Using a legal loophole to ruin a neighbor financially is, in the eyes of God, an act of sheer violence.
I am going to play devil's advocate here, specifically regarding his point about price gouging, because this crashes headlong into modern macroeconomics.
All right, let us hear the pushback.
If food is scarce, Or let us say a massive hurricane is offshore and portable generators are in incredibly high demand. Doesn't the free market dictate higher prices?
That is the basic law of supply and demand.
Right. If a Christian business owner keeps prices flat during a severe shortage, their inventory gets wiped out in 5 minutes by hoarders who will probably just resell the items themselves.
So how is a business owner supposed to balance basic market economics with Edwards's strict moral prohibition against oppressing the needy?
Does the mechanics of the market excuse the raising of prices?
You are hitting on a massive, difficult tension. We have to remember that Edwards is not writing a textbook on macroeconomics or supply chain management.
He is diagnosing the spiritual condition of the human heart.
His primary concern is the internal motivation of the seller.
Are you raising the price slightly to manage your inventory, ensure broader distribution to more families, and cover your own increased costs of securing emergency freight?
Or are you looking at a line of desperate, terrified people and thinking, here's my golden opportunity to maximize my profit margin at the expense of their suffering?
Edwards explicitly condemns taking occasion from the necessity of poor people to raise the price of provisions even above the current market rate.
If starving people will hand over almost any price for a loaf of bread rather than watch their children go without it, and you exploit that desperation to line your pockets,
You are an oppressor.
the Christian business owner must operate with a conscience held captive to the Word of God.
Recognizing that exploiting human vulnerability is abhorrent to the Lord, regardless of what the invisible hand of the free market allows.
Moving from overt oppression and legal loopholes, we arrive at the precise definition of secret theft.
This introduces a fascinating discussion that highlights the nuances of consent.
Edwards defines strict stealing as a designed taking of our neighbor's goods from him without his consent or knowledge,
He carefully differentiates this from robbery, which is done openly and aggressively.
and extortion, which forces a person to give their consent against their true will.
He also makes a very crucial distinction between explicit consent and implicit consent.
For example, he mentions that a general custom might imply consent.
Like grabbing an apple from a neighbor's orchard, if that is the understood, universally accepted cultural norm of the village.
We must focus highly on the word designed in his definition.
Edwards is constantly evaluating the intent of the human heart.
If you walk away with someone's property by pure accident or through an honest, absent-minded mistake, it is not strict theft in the moral sense.
You must make full restitution the moment you realize the error, of course.
But the moral culpability of a thief is entirely tied to the design.
The specific, premeditated intention to conceal your action is what legally proves your guilt in the courtroom of your own conscience.
You take the item privately because you know with absolute certainty that the owner would not give you their consent.
The desire for secrecy is the undeniable evidence that you know you are committing a wrong.
And regarding implicit consent, Edwards is very careful to build a fence around it.
He notes that implicit consent relies on an established, long-standing custom, where it is universally presumed no sensible injury is done to the owner.
It is not a blank check you can write yourself to assume someone would not mind if you took their property.
Let me apply this design taking without knowledge to digital property, because this is where 18th century theology meets the modern era head-on.
Think about the casual nature of digital piracy.
Pirating a newly released movie, downloading copied software that costs hundreds of dollars, or illegally streaming a pay-per-view sports event.
The corporation or the creator who owns the copyright does not explicitly know you are doing it in that exact moment.
And you certainly lack their consent. You are acting like a digital ghost, sneaking through the back door of a movie theater without paying for a ticket.
Does Edwards' definition catch 21st century digital piracy?
I argue it catches it perfectly.
You are engaged in a design taking of goods without consent or knowledge.
The fact that you are duplicating a digital file consisting of ones and zeros rather than physically carrying a television out of a store.
It does not alter the moral geometry of the act one bit.
The moral geometry is identical. You are unjustly usurping the creator's property right to the fruits of their own intellectual and creative labor.
The premeditated design is there, the lack of consent is there, and the secrecy of doing it behind a screen in your living room is there.
And this reality naturally forces us to confront the psychological gymnastics we use to justify our secret thefts.
Having strictly defined what stealing is, Edwards transitions to the anatomy of self-deception and the elaborate, dishonest excuses we formulate in our own minds.
Human beings are brilliant defense attorneys for our own sins.
We construct entire legal defenses in our heads before we even commit the act.
We really are phenomenal at justifying ourselves.
Let us examine the three main excuses Edwards highlights from his own pastoral experience.
Excuse number one is, they owe me.
This is the justification used when someone takes matters into their own hands to seize property.
Instead of following a regular, open, and legal proceeding for collecting a debt they feel they are owed.
Excuse number two is, I did them a favor.
Edwards provides this incredibly specific, highly relatable example of someone helping out at a neighborhood gathering, maybe a barn raising or a large harvest meal.
The person secretly takes extra food or supplies home, thinking their unpaid labor more than covers the cost of the provisions.
Edwards does not mince words here. He calls this justification unmanly and vile.
And excuse number three is, it is just a small matter.
This is the rapid rationalization that the item in question is so incredibly cheap, so inconsequential that it is not even worth the breath to ask for it.
Let us dissect that third excuse first, the small matter defense, because it is the most common.
Edwards dismantles this with flawless, airtight logic.
He argues that if an item is truly too small to ask for, then why do you feel the need to conceal taking it?
The very fact that you slip it into your pocket when no one is looking proves that your own conscience suspects the owner would object.
Furthermore, he establishes a crucial principle of property rights. The owner, and only the owner, has the sole right to determine the value of their possessions.
The person taking the item cannot arbitrarily decide that the property is worthless to justify their theft.
And regarding the first two excuses, the vigilante justice and the unpaid labor, they are rooted in a total, arrogant disregard for orderly society.
You cannot install yourself as a private judge, a private jury, and a private executioner to seize goods just because you harbor a grievance or feel you are undercompensated.
That mindset leads to absolute societal chaos.
I want to spend a minute on that second excuse, the potluck theft example, because it functions as a perfect high-definition mirror for modern entitlement.
Let us look into the psychology of how we build these mental courtrooms.
Think about taking office supplies from your workplace. You are packing up your bag at 5 o'clock. You grab a handful of expensive gel pens, a couple of premium notebooks, and maybe a printer ink cartridge.
In your head, the internal monologue runs totally like this. I answered emails for 2 hours on Saturday morning. I missed my kid's soccer game to finish that presentation. The company owes me.
They did not pay me overtime. This ink cartridge is basically just fair compensation for my extra effort.
We process this entire trial in our minds in 3 seconds.
We decide our employer owes us a debt, so we extract our own payment in the form of stationery.
Edwards is pointing a finger right at that entitlement, exposing how sin uses grievance to bypass our conscience, and calling it vile theft.
That internal monologue of entitlement is a textbook manifestation of human depravity.
Notice how we brilliantly twist the narrative. We cast ourselves as the oppressed victim who is simply seeking cosmic justice and balancing the scales.
When, in objective reality, we are the perpetrator committing a secret theft against our employer.
And Edwards points out that the desire to keep the act secret completely dismantles the entire excuse.
If you truly, genuinely believed those office supplies were rightfully yours as legal compensation for your Saturday emails, you would openly walk into your manager's office.
Hold up the ink cartridge and declare that you are taking it in lieu of overtime pay.
But you do not do that. You bury it at the bottom of your bag because you know they would never consent.
The secrecy is the absolute proof of your guilt.
If justifying the theft of office supplies is uncomfortable, where Edwards goes next is terrifying.
We move from defrauding our employers and our neighbors to what he considers the most egregious, highly aggravated form of theft imaginable.
Attempting to defraud the Almighty, we are talking about the public offering plate.
Edwards addresses a specific fraud that was apparently rampant in his own Northampton congregation.
People were putting bad, clipped, or counterfeit money into the public contribution box meant for the poor.
They wanted to save their public credit. They desperately wanted the people sitting in the pews next to them to see their hand dropping money into the box, gaining the reputation of generosity.
But they put in coins that they knew perfectly well no merchant in town would accept in trade.
Edwards links this direct hypocrisy to Malachi 1:14,
where God curses the deceiver who has a healthy male in his flock, but vows and sacrifices a sick, lame, or corrupt animal to the Lord.
An animal a human governor would reject in a second.
The theology operating behind the specific fraud is terrifying when you understand the mechanics of it.
In the Reformed tradition, the financial contributions gathered for the poor in the Christian church act as the modern New Covenant equivalent of Old Testament sacrifices.
The book of Proverbs explicitly states that giving to the poor is lending to the Lord.
The deacons who hold the offering plate are acting as Christ's appointed receivers.
Therefore, when you drop a counterfeit coin into that box, you are not just tricking the deacons.
You are attempting to pass off counterfeit currency to the creator of the universe.
Edwards immediately references the terrifying narrative of Ananias and Sapphira in the 5th chapter of Acts.
They sold a piece of real estate, kept back a large portion of the profits for themselves, but presented the rest of the money to the apostles as if it were the full entire amount.
They wanted the public glory of total, radical sacrifice without paying the actual cost.
The apostle Peter told them they had not lied to men but to God the Holy Spirit.
Offering bad money to purchase the optics of generosity is that exact same sin.
I see so many modern parallels to this, and it goes far beyond the physical offering plate.
Think about a massive corporation or a wealthy individual making a highly publicized, televised donation that actually costs them nothing.
Perhaps it is a convoluted tax write-off loophole that ultimately benefits their bottom line, but they hire a massive PR firm to paint them as selfless philanthropists.
Or, on a much more personal level that hits closer to home, think about the motivation behind donating broken appliances, heavily stained clothing, or completely unusable items to a charity shop in late December.
Just so you can claim an itemized tax receipt at the end of the year.
You are essentially giving away trash, claiming a financial benefit from the government, and patting yourself on the back for being a charitable citizen.
The sheer, blinding arrogance Edwards identifies here is astounding.
We actually convince ourselves we can outsmart God's accounting system.
We think God is impressed by the public optics of our giving while completely ignoring the fraudulent substance of the gift.
It is the ultimate spiritual folly. God is omniscient. He sees the hidden intent of the heart just as clearly as he sees the bank ledger.
Attempting to defraud an all-knowing God is an act of deep spiritual blindness.
Edwards is urgently pleading with his congregation to wake up to the reality that God will not be mocked by their clipped coins.
And this urgency brings us to a crucial pivot in his sermon, where he traces these deeply ingrained habits of deceit back to their earliest origins.
He examines how these habits do not just appear in adulthood, but start very early in life.
Addressing a specific cultural problem of his day, children stealing fruit from neighbors.
Yes, the fruit tree defense and the heavy weight of parental duty.
Edwards tackles the incredibly common practice of children stealing fruit from neighbors' trees or private enclosures.
Apparently, people in his town were actually using a specific Bible verse to justify letting their kids do this.
They cited Deuteronomy 23.24, which allowed an Israelite to eat grapes to their fill when occasionally passing through a neighbor's vineyard.
Edwards completely debunks this blatant misuse of Scripture by doing some basic historical context work.
He clarifies the agrarian realities. In ancient Canaan, vineyards were everywhere. They were massively abundant.
So a traveler grabbing a handful of grapes as they walked by caused no sensible injury to the vineyard owner.
But in 18th century New England, battling harsh winters and rocky soil, orchards were rare. Cultivated fruit was scarce and highly valued.
Therefore, the loss to the owner when children stripped a tree was significant.
You cannot apply the cultural norms of ancient Israelite vineyards to rare New England apple orchards to justify theft.
That is a brilliant piece of biblical exegesis by Edwards. He absolutely refuses to let people rip a verse out of its historical and cultural context to provide theological cover for their sin.
But the heavier theological blow in this section falls entirely on the parents.
Edwards delivers a severe, terrifying exhortation to parents who tolerate this behavior in their children.
He states that parents who know their children are stealing fruit and do not thoroughly, actively restrain them are bringing the judgment of God upon their own heads.
He cites the harrowing example of Eli the priest from the book of 1 Samuel.
Eli's sons were making themselves vile by stealing meat from the tabernacle sacrifices and abusing the worshipers.
Eli knew about it. He gave them a mild, weak verbal reprimand, saying, "Why do you do such things?"
But he did not actively stop them. Because he failed to physically and legally restrain his sons, God judged Eli's entire house forever.
Edwards' point is clear. By tolerating minor thefts in youth, parents are actively, deliberately training their children in the dark arts of injustice.
This directly challenges our modern parenting norms in a very uncomfortable way.
We have this pervasive cultural boys will be boys mentality, or this psychological safety net where we assume kids just go through mischievous phases.
If a teenager steals a neighbor's Wi-Fi by guessing the password, or a child shoplifts a candy bar from the grocery store, or illegally downloads a video game,
Do parents excuse it as just a harmless phase?
do they issue a mild scolding, pay for the candy bar, and move on without any real consequence?
Edwards views parental tolerance of theft as a sin equal in weight to the theft itself.
The requirement upon the parent is not just gentle, modern instruction. It is active, thorough, uncompromising restraint.
If you let your kid practice minor injustice when they are 10, you're preparing them to be a major fraud when they are 30.
That is correct. In the Reformed view, the home is the primary school of the moral law. It is the first government a child encounters.
If the eighth commandment is not strictly enforced in the living room and the backyard, it certainly will not be respected in the corporate boardroom or the marketplace later in life.
And this sobering reality leads us to the final and perhaps most critical application of the entire text.
What do you do if you are listening to this deep dive right now and the x-ray has revealed the fractures?
What if you realize you were guilty?
What if you have withheld labor, or strategically delayed paying debts, or concealed defects in a sale, or justified keeping the office supplies?
This brings us to Edwards's urgent call for restitution.
Restitution. Edwards states that making restitution is an absolute, non-negotiable duty.
He explains a concept that changes everything. Theft is not a past tense event.
This is crucial to grasp. If you stole something 10 years ago, and you still have it sitting in your garage, or you still hold the financial profits you gained from selling it,
You are continually wronging your neighbor every single day you retain it.
you're living in an active, ongoing state of theft.
He issues a severe warning against the common practice of waiting until your deathbed to make restitution in your will.
He says that coming before the infinitely holy judge of the universe with stolen goods still clutching your hands is a fearful, catastrophic risk.
He provides the only way out. If you go to your neighbor, confess your theft, and the neighbor freely forgives the debt, you are acquitted before God.
Because at that moment of forgiveness, the neighbor has officially gifted the value to you.
But otherwise, physical restitution must be made, or explicit orders left in your will for it to be made immediately after your death.
This teaching is firmly rooted in Reformed theology concerning the true nature of repentance.
True repentance is not just feeling emotional sorrow or shedding tears about what you did.
It involves a fundamental change of mind that must inevitably lead to a physical change of action.
You cannot sincerely ask God for forgiveness while willfully, stubbornly holding on to the profits of your sin.
The story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector in the Gospel of Luke, is the prime biblical example.
When salvation came to his house, his immediate, unprompted response was to restore fourfold to anyone he had defrauded.
Keeping the stolen goods proves that you love the sin more than you desire reconciliation with God. Restitution is the physical proof of a spiritual repentance.
Wait, let me push back on how this works in the real world because life gets incredibly messy and complicated.
Okay, what is the scenario?
What if the person you wronged 30 years ago is dead and you have no idea where their family is?
Or what if the entity you defrauded is a faceless multinational software corporation that you do not even work for anymore?
How does one make restitution when the direct path to the victim is completely closed?
You cannot just write a check to a deceased person.
And sending a $20 bill in an unmarked envelope to the corporate headquarters of a massive retail chain feels absurd.
Is it giving that money to a random charity just a modern version of buying medieval indulgences to clear your conscience?
That is a very fair challenge, and the Reformed tradition has addressed this exact logistical nightmare historically.
It is not about buying an indulgence. It is about the principle of restoring the value and cleansing your own hands of the unjust gain.
If the direct victim is deceased, restitution should be made to their lawful heirs.
If no heirs can possibly be found after diligent search, or if it is a situation with a massive corporation where direct restitution is practically impossible to route correctly to the actual shareholders you injured.
The moral principle of divesting yourself of the stolen value remains absolute.
In those specific cases, the funds should be redirected to charitable giving, to the poor, or to the church.
The logistics of the situation can never, ever be used as a convenient excuse to keep the stolen gain in your own bank account.
The point is that the money does not belong to you. and you must divest yourself of it for the benefit of others, rather than continuing to enrich yourself with a stolen asset.
We need to pull back and look at the massive scope of everything we have covered in this deep dive.
We have laid out Edward's eighth commandment blueprint. It is not just about the burglar with a crowbar.
It covers our exact work hours and how we manage our employer's time.
It covers the psychology behind our unpaid debts and our deliberately delayed invoices.
It covers our sales pitches, our marketing omissions, and our justification for price gouging.
It covers the elaborate, secret rationalizations we build in our minds for taking what we think we are owed.
And the counterfeit generosity we put in the offering plate.
It even covers how we discipline our children when they take things that do not belong to them.
The scope is truly comprehensive. It leaves absolutely no corner of our daily lives unexamined.
And so, the challenge for you, the listener, is to run a ruthless audit on your own life using Edwards' strict definition.
Take the time this week to ask yourself, is there any area, any relationship, any transaction where you are unjustly usurping another's property without their consent?
Are you holding on to anything, whether it is time, money, physical goods, or the truth in a business deal that rightfully belongs to someone else?
The moral law is a flawless mirror, and we must possess the courage to look closely at what it reflects about our own hearts.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on that builds on all this source material.
We live in an age of data brokers, surveillance capitalism, and hyper-targeted advertising.
Our personal data, our daily habits, our physical locations, our private preferences has become highly valuable, monetized property.
If Jonathan Edwards were preaching this exact sermon today, how would he view the massive tech companies that harvest our personal data through incredibly confusing 100-page terms of service agreements that they know no human being actually reads?
Are we participating in a vast societal system of mass, implicit theft?
Consider how the 1740 logic of consent and knowledge applies to the digital footprint you will leave behind today.
Are they unjustly usurping your property? We started by talking about the fuzzy, comfortable X-ray of our own moral landscape.
Edwards has given us the high-definition scan. The fractures are clearly visible.
The question is, what will you do about them tomorrow?